Can everyone see the screen, the presentation screen? Great, all right, great. So we're making our way through the book, The Cycle Breaker. You know, I like this, I may be able to move this over. And we're in chapter 4. So chapter 4, what's interesting is I didn't create that font. When I saw that, it was kind of funny, but the bottom line is men lie, people lie, women lie, cameras don't lie, right? So we're talking about in this book, The Cycle Breaker, chapter 4 starts with all of the events that took place were captured on closed circuit video cameras located in that rapid station or that RTA station. And although they ran from the scene, it wouldn't be long before their identities were discovered. So stopping right there and kind of focusing on what we're dealing with right now in this country, it's interesting that we have that same situation, that cameras across this country are starting to be the great equalizer, right? They're catching things that's happening. In fact, we know that the entire George Floyd situation would not be where it is today if it wasn't for the cameras. And that goes for his situation and many that have followed or come before it. And there are even some new things that have come up recently. But the bottom line is the cameras that are bringing about this change. But at the same time, it's the advancement of technology that is causing many people to get caught up in the legal system. Because no matter where you go now, there may be a camera watching what you do. So we can go back as far as the NFL cases when they caught the running back committing domestic violence in the elevator against his girlfriend. Of course, we have George Floyd. And then you even have those two situations with officers during the protest. I'm not sure if you caught this, but it's been making news that I think it was in Boston. There was a protester, an elderly man who was standing in the way of the officers, and they kind of just ran him over. And
Buffalo.
Was it Buffalo? Thank you. So not Boston, Buffalo. And he was a Caucasian man, but the bottom line is that had it not been for the video, who knows what they would have said, right? You know, he fell, he tripped, he's old, you know, he lost his balance. And then the video also captured the fact that when that officer was arrested and let out of jail, there were loud applause. You know, his supporters were there. So it's continuing to show that there is a divide in this country when it comes to race as well as police versus everybody else. And then over the weekend, I saw another video, you may have caught this, a police officer has been charged with assault for what they are calling the excessive use of a taser. Now, in this particular video, there was an African-American man, I don't know if you saw this, in the middle of the street. He wasn't really listening to the officer's orders, and then the officers began to use a taser on him, but he used it continuously. I don't know how many times, but it was over and over. And the police force acted very quickly. The chief in that area acted very quickly, saying that, look, this is on video, we see it, it was overboard, and because of that, he has to be charged. So it goes back to what we're dealing with in the book. The bottom line is that with these cameras now, it's good and bad. For those of us who are not interested in breaking the law or not interested in risking it, right? Because not everybody wakes up in the morning saying, hey, I want to break the law, but we take risks during the day based on various elements or various scenarios. We may take a risk. But nowadays, you can't take a risk because the cameras are always on you. So that's a good thing. The bad part of it is, again, it's something that's causing people to get caught in the legal system. So we start chapter 4 recognizing that the cameras caught what happened in the night with these young men. And if you remember from the book, because I know not all of you have this book, we are following the story of 5 men who are caught up in the legal system. And it basically started by them having a night or several nights, just hanging out, nothing to do, you know, kicking it, smoking, drinking. And they made the mistake of taking the opportunity to rob somebody. They weren't even planning to rob anyone, but they did it. And I'll tell you this, a lot of the stories that I come up with, some of them reflect what I've experienced as an attorney. One of my first major cases when I went on my own was representing a young man who him and his friends did exactly what's in this story. They were riding around East Cleveland, robbing people. And at one point, they robbed somebody. That person had a gun, shot and killed one of my client's accomplices. my client was charged with murder. So, you know, it kind of reflected what I talked about in this book, but it's a real life scenario and it happens all the time. All right. So Jeff, one of our main characters, he ran straight home. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to say. And he didn't feel comfortable telling his mother or Rusty's mom that Rusty was shot. So remember, Jeff and Rusty are friends. Rusty was shot. He ended up in the hospital. But here you go now. You go home and you wonder, how far do you get involved with telling your mom or telling somebody what happened? We're going to talk about this a little bit later today, because that borderlines with a conversation that happens about snitching. So oftentimes we have to think, we are forced with making the decision, is working with law enforcement a form of snitching, or is it a form of giving information that either helps you or helps somebody else? And that's been a long running debate, not only in my community, but communities all over the place. How much should we help and work with the law enforcement agencies? And then now, look at what's going on in this country. We know no one trusts officers, or at least not many people. And if you don't trust them, why would you work with them? That's going to be one of our dilemmas. And then I don't know if you've been watching, but what's happening across our country, people are yelling and screaming for police departments to be defunded. Have you heard that argument yet? All right. So basically you have right now two different developments. You have the group of people who are saying, we don't need police officers, defund them, get rid of them. And then you have those who are taking a little bit of a step back and they're saying, well, it's not about defunding police, but let's not give them such a high amount of money in their budgets that they're just over policing, and that they have to, you know, give some of that money to community programs or education or training. So those are the two areas. And I will tell you, I agree with the need for more training. There's no doubt about that. But we all know that if something happens in your community, you want to call 911. That's what people do. You dial 911 and you expect the police officer to come and help. So here we are at this stage in the book where Rusty has to figure out if he's going to help. Now, here's a quote from the book that I pulled out. Even though you've never been in trouble, one bad decision can change your life. And we've talked about that before. And I think it's important to recognize yet again that oftentimes we're not dealing with people who want to destroy their lives. I really don't believe that anyone gets up in the morning and says, I'm willing to throw it away today. I'm gonna throw everything away. I'm gonna go out here and do something that's gonna cause me to lose my job and maybe even get arrested. Most people don't think like that. But the problem is, if you're not thinking in the opposite direction, you may fall into that direction. So it's almost like thinking about life like a game. You know, and either in the game, either you're playing offense or you're playing defense. And I would submit to you that in our lives, we have to really think about playing defense. In fact, you know, the men in the room may have heard it said before, defense wins championships, right? They say that in football, they say that in basketball. And the point of the matter is, when you play a defensive game, making sure you're not losing, making sure that the other party or your opponent or your enemy doesn't score points against you, you have a better chance of winning. So if we look at the legal system as your opponent, or you look at the police as your opponent, your goal playing defense should be, I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to make it through my day without giving police officers any reason to arrest me. That is the goal. And I submit to you, though it's not a popular opinion, that's where we are right now. We are in a position where we have to live and act defensively so that you can go home every night without worrying about being injured, killed, or arrested by police officers. And maybe one day that'll change if police officers get more training, more compassion. But until then, to the question that we all have, what can you do right now to make sure that you're not caught up in this legal system? What can you do right now to make sure that you're not caught in the legal matrix, or that you are continuing to be a cycle breaker? Is you play defense. So when you wake up in the morning, all of your decisions should be, you know what, I need to make sure I'm not going to get arrested today, or I need to make sure I'm not going to lose my job today. And once you set those small goals, you move in those directions all day. So if your goal is not to lose your job, you get up in the morning and you get to work on time. You know, if your goal is not to lose your job, you're not going to have an argument with your boss so that he or she has a reason to demote you or suspend you or fire you. If your goal is not to have a negative interaction with police officers, the goal should be to move in a way that police don't even have to look at you. And it's unfortunate that we have to even think like that. But if you're trying to win the game, why not think like that? Yeah, in a perfect world, everybody can score 100 points, right? In a perfect world, every basketball player would be as good as Michael Jordan. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world where sometimes it's not fair, and sometimes the legal system is stacked against you. So the best way to win that game is to play defense from day one. Make your decisions in a way that you don't have negative run-ins with the legal system. All right, so that's on that quote. Even though you have never been in trouble, one bad decision can change your entire life. All right, now the next excerpt from the book is we talk about Jeff again. We went back to his regular routine of playing video games, smoking weed, but this time he decided to stay in the house. So why do I go back to that one? Is because we learned early on in this story, the cycle breaker story, that, and we agreed to a certain extent, that when you don't have goals and you don't have objectives for your regular day or your life, you'll do anything. It's like, you know, you're just chilling and somebody calls you and say, hey, let's go kick it. Let's go down to the, you know, to the beach or whatever the case may be. You may do it not realizing that there could be some traps. But if you know that, hey, I want to graduate from my college, or I want to get into college, or I want to get into a trade school, or I want to start my own business, when somebody presents you with an opportunity, you're going to weigh it against whatever your goals are. So in this particular situation, we have Jeff. He went right back to doing the same thing, chilling, smoking weed, not doing much of anything productive, just kicking it. All right. Now this next one is kind of long. Let me see here. To change my view. All right. So it wasn't long before Rusty's mom began to put the pieces together, and she eventually figured out the identities of everyone involved. So here we go. These young men went out one night to kick it. They found someone by himself and said, hey, let's go rob that dude. It wasn't like they started out wanting to rob him, but they had nothing else to do. So remember in the story, they went up to rob the man, not knowing that the man had a weapon. So he pulled out his gun, defended himself, and shot one of the boys. That boy is Rusty. So Rusty is in the hospital right now, and his mom is trying to figure out what happened, who was with my son, who saw what happened. So somehow she was able to make the discovery faster than detectives, right? And that doesn't shock anybody. You know, these mothers, your mothers, and all mothers, they know how to put stuff together. So she figured it out. And she knew what was going on. So she went over to Jeff's mother's house. She didn't go to the police because, again, there's that stigma of being a snitch. But she went over there to talk about what happened. So she goes in, she says, what's going on? I think your son was involved with my son in this shooting, and we need to find out what's happening. So that goes to show you that oftentimes the streets will put stuff together before we even know it, and we know that to be true. The difference between a person who says they will not snitch and a person who talks to the police is that one of those persons is more concerned about their future than being concerned about their reputation. Now let that sink in for a minute. A lot of people don't snitch, not necessarily because they can't stand police, or not necessarily because they're not concerned about justice. It's because they don't want the streets to talk about them and say that they're snitching. So some people are so dead set and so committed to their reputation that they're willing to risk their entire lives. There are people sitting in jails right now who said to themselves, they'd rather go to jail than to tell on somebody else. And though, again, I always tell you, eventually we'll have a conversation on snitching because it gets really deep and I would love to hear what your opinions are. Keep in mind, the main thing that you're thinking about is this. If there's somebody from your neighborhood or in your clique or in your circle and something goes wrong, they did something wrong. but you are in trouble for it. And they say to you, hey, I know you're not going to snitch on me. What is that person doing? That person is asking you to take responsibility for something that they did. Now remember, let me play that back again. Two people in the car. One person has the drugs. He bought them. That's his ounce of drugs. That's his ounce of cocaine, right? Y'all both get pulled over. And in fact, because you're driving the car, you get charged with the drugs. But your friend says, hey, if you really my boy, if you're really down with me, you're not going to tell that those are my drugs. So again, what he's asking you to do is take the fall for him. In other words, he's asking you to take responsibility for him, to be loyal, to not be a snitch. But if you think about it, who is the one not being loyal? It's the guy that's asking you to take responsibility for what he did. Because if he cared anything about you, your future, or your family, he would say, you know what? Those are my drugs. He didn't have nothing to do with it. But instead, these guys throw out this code talking about if you are my boy or if you're with me, you wouldn't snitch. Whereas the flip side of that is, if you are my boy, if you with me, you wouldn't let me take the fall for something I didn't do. So that's really what happens with snitching. Now, there's a whole
Not to
other
interrupt
level
you,
of snitching.
Judge Dawson, I was just
Go ahead. Go ahead.
because, you know, and I think about that a lot of times, like, even though I don't get myself in trouble and stuff like that, but you always got to think about stuff like that. Even though people say they're your friends, 9 times out of 10, they not really your friends. Because if you think about it, you got to think of like what you just said. If I needed somebody to, you know, take the rap for me or to have my back, would they really have my back? And the answer to that is no.
Right. Exactly. And you know what the other, now here's the difference though, and I think we can all agree on this. The other one is, let's say you all went in on the drugs. Everybody pitched in. Now, if you go to the police and say, hey, because I got in trouble, let me tell you who else went in on this, even though they weren't with you. Now, maybe that's snitching. I mean, that's a difference. So you're by yourself, you all pay for the drugs, you get caught, and you say, hey, I'm gonna tell you about Jesse, because Jesse has something to do with this. And I'm gonna tell you about Nicole, because Nicole, now that's different. That's snitching, but beyond snitching, that's not taking responsibility. If you get caught doing what you do, stand up, be a man, be a woman, and deal with the consequences. Because the bottom line is, the other people will not take the fall for you. So that's where we are in this story. Where we are in this story is we're talking about the fact that right now, nobody wanted to tell what was going on. So, good news is we're almost at our conclusion, because you know what? Those chapters are short. All right, so look, here we are. So this is where we get to some of the things I want you to do for homework. Let me see real quick. Give me a second. All right, so the first one is this. After class assignments. Hold on. Went further up to our older stuff. Hold up. All right, here we go. All right, the first one. All right, so let's talk about this. Here's the work that you're gonna do to turn in. And Mr. Darwish, this is how you get your credit for being in the session, because our sessions are not long. The first question that I want you to write about is, how are families affected when a relative is arrested? List all the ways. And you can even put them in bullet points. So I'm talking about not just the person arrested, but how is the person's family affected when someone is arrested? Number 2, should there be a code of no snitching in a family? And I'll tell you, I'm not judging you by your answers, because let me tell you something that's funny. The law actually supports no snitching in a family. Can anybody tell me how? If you can guess this, it's worth 1,000 points. How does the law, think of a law that's on the books. that promotes no snitching in a family?
I know that married couples can't, they
That's
can't
exactly-
force a married couple.
There it is, Jesse. That's exactly what I was talking about. So think about this. There is actually a law that says if you and I are married, you don't have to tell anything about what I'm doing. So you never have to snitch on somebody that you're married to, if you didn't know that. So if it's one reason to get married, that may be the best one. All right, here we go again. The next one, explain the no snitching culture. So in your own words, talk about what's going on in our culture right now where where they're promoting no snitching. You had a question? Any questions? No? Okay. Anybody else? All right. The no snitching culture. The next one, what is the difference? And we talked about this, so this should be an easy one. What's the difference between taking responsibility for your actions versus snitching? So I need you to put it in your own words. Now you heard me talk about it, and that's something that you can probably just remember, but in your own words, what's the difference between taking responsibility for your actions and snitching? Now, the next few, can you take responsibility for your actions and not be a snitch? So just consider that. Read that. Tell me what your thoughts are. And what are the consequences of snitching? See, it's easy for me to sit here and say that nobody should snitch or that you should snitch. Either way, I can take both sides, right? No snitching, but what are the consequences that are associated with it? Because if you're not in that situation, you can always, give a big opinion about it. Hey, I would never snitch, or I'm going to always stand up and tell what's going on. But what are the consequences of snitching? And some of us know them already. You can probably throw a bunch of them out at me already. Sometimes, your safety is at risk, right? Things like that. So what are the consequences? And what are the benefits of snitching? So with those questions, I want us to really talk about, hey, what do you win when you snitch? Or what are the consequences if you snitch? And then what are the consequences of taking responsibility? Are there consequences to taking responsibility? If you think they are, or there are consequences, list them there. And then the last one, benefits. What are the benefits of taking responsibility? So you have it two ways: the consequences of snitching, the benefits of snitching. The consequences of taking responsibility versus the benefits of taking responsibility. So those are the questions I want you to consider. Did everybody either screenshot that? That's an easy way to save it. That way you'll have it. Or again, I'll put the video up on our website. And then we have one more section here. And these are easy. These are points of discussion that I want you to consider. And it's important that we do that because these are the things that are happening in our country right now. How does this chapter, everything that we just read from the cycle breaker in chapter 4, how does that relate to the George Floyd movement? So we're talking about cameras. We talked about that in the very beginning. How does the existence of cameras and what role that they play, how does that relate to what's happening right now in real life in George Floyd's movement? What about police actions? How does that relate to what we're dealing with now? Now, keep in mind, when we started with chapter 4, in the book, there's a lot more that we didn't talk about. I just pulled out some excerpts. But in chapter 4, basically the young men are arrested and the police are reviewing the video to find out who was all involved. The next one, number 3, looting and everything that's going on with looting and rioting. How does that relate to what we talked about in our book in chapter 4? Is it simply the fact that looting is when you go out and tear up some stuff and you are destructive? Maybe just the general act of those young men attacking an innocent person who had nothing to do with anything that night. Maybe that's the relationship. So I'm kind of giving you a hint there. And then the last one, President Trump. If you remember, over the weekend during the protests, there was a certain act that took place that the government caused that dealt with his photo opportunity, his photo op. I don't know if you remember that, but he did a certain amount of, he did a certain movement. I'm trying not to give it away. How does that relate to what we're talking about in this chapter? The way that the officers or those who are in charge, how they did something for a photo op. Because remember, the beginning of the chapter, we're talking about men lie, women lie, but photos don't lie. Now, if you are familiar with rap music, the actual quote is that men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. But in our book right now, we're talking about that video evidence of what happened. So
Judge
those
Dawson,
are our points of discussion. Yes, go ahead.
not to interrupt you, I apologize.
That's okay.
I didn't get to see that. I think I seen something on like Instagram or something. Is it like something that he was mimicking? Was he mimicking something?
Let's do this. Let's have one of our participants help us out. Who saw what happened in regard to President Trump and his photo op? Who saw that? Anybody?
I seen the one that he was holding a book.
All right, he was holding a book. He was holding a Bible. What happened before that to get to that point?
Oh, that one I have not seen.
Okay, it's close to it. Jesse, did you see that?
Where he had people tear gassed? Are you talking about?
Yeah, you remember that, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so you want to just sum it up? What happened? What describe that whole scene? What happened?
Well, he wanted to take a ceremonial stroll to a church, and there were protesters in the way, and he had a bunch of people tear gassed, and then stepped in front of the church and held the Bible up upside down and couldn't even think of anything to say. And
right. Thank you. So that's it, Nicole. So basically what he did was he used his police force and his, all the security to begin pushing the protesters. Supposedly they were being very peaceful at the time. And he pushed them. Well, they moved them. They shot tear gas and those explosions to get them out of the way, all so that he could come in and take a picture. And like he said, Jesse said he had the Bible upside down. So you were right, Sam. They took the pictures, and that was it. So my point is, again, we started this chapter talking about video and what it means and how it captures certain things. And we end the session with the way that President Trump was able to manipulate, photography for his own benefit. Why did he do that? Some of you may have your own opinion. That's a point of discussion. Why did President Trump feel the need to move all the protesters out of the way just to take a picture in front of the church holding his Bible? And that's one. Why did he do that? Or you can speak from the perspective of what's your impression based on the fact that we caught that on video? Does that change our impression of President Trump? Does that, make us feel a certain type of way that he was willing to move people out of the way who were protesting excessive force in the first place, and he used force to move them just to take a picture? So think about those things. Again, I'll have this video and the other ones on the website. That was our short 35-minute session today. So remember, and let me do this real quick. I want you to email me your work. And I'm gonna see if I can put the email up. Everybody see, you're still seeing the screen, right?
And you said the website is on your website?
Yep, so the website is judgedawson.com. The email that you're gonna send your work to is judgewilliamdawson@gmail. Can everybody see that on the screen? You all see that? Can you see it? No? Let me see, I'm gonna make it bigger. All right, so the website is judgedawson.com. The password for you all to get into the video section is Pro Club, right, Jesse? I got to look at my notes. Is that it? Pro Club 2020? Yep, that's it. All right, so let me put this back up and make sure you can all see it. There it is right there. Okay, website for videos.
Does it have
like
a description to go in there? Like, does it say something next to it, like to find it?
It says, it should say Pro Club.
Oh, the pro club. Okay.
Yep. So that's what we are.